this morning, this afternoon, wherever you're at in the world today, for capture planning and best practices within the AEC industry. Today I have Steve Walker with me, who will be taking us through his best practices that he uses and has learned over his lots of years in AEC. Steve and I have informally crossed paths way back when with HDR and got to know each other a couple years ago. And as Evan and others know about Steve, he is quite the expert. So I thought he would be a great person to start us off with all things capture planning, but a little bit about me before I hand it over to Steve. I'm Angie Wolfe, for those that don't know me. I'm the owner, proposal manager, master trainer at Ideas at Dawn, a company I started a couple years ago to provide large civil engineering and construction firms a competitive advantage with their proposal and training processes. That's how I met Steve, ironically, through another client. Didn't realize I didn't know him. So today he's going to talk about all things capture planning and about how we need to get to know our clients, because in the end, they do pick their friends. So Steve, I will hand it over to you.
Capture planning is a big topic, and I could talk for days and probably have, but I've decided to pick a couple of topics, a couple of elements of capture planning that I think are really useful that we can cover in a short time, and you could walk away with something really useful from this, I'm hoping. So let me share my screen. Cross the first hurdle. So as I mentioned, this is all about capture planning. It's a piece from a bigger program that I do called Executing Strategic Pursuits. I call it ESP. And I'm going to talk about a couple of specific elements of capture planning, but I'm going to kind of start with the big picture. Why do we do capture planning? What does it really mean? Some of the key elements that lead to success, and I'm going to focus on one particular tool that is so simple yet so powerful. If you take away nothing except that, it will probably be worth, well, not probably, it will definitely be worth your time. So capture planning, what is it? There's a quote that I like a lot. It's from Dale Carnegie, from his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And Dale's comment is the only way to influence someone is to find out what they want and help them get it. And he didn't say a good way or the best way or one way. Dale said the only way to influence someone is to find out what they want and help them get it. So capture planning is a very systematic approach to developing a client-centered message. And I'll talk more about why I think that's so important. So when a client selects us, they're taking a risk, obviously. And in this business, there are two things that we have to do in order to get the client, to convince a client that we're the ones they want. And the first one we're pretty good at. The other one, as an industry, maybe not so much. So the first one is to make it possible for them to select us. This is to give them, to answer the mail and make sure they have all the information they need in order to give us the most points. The other one that we don't tend to be quite as good at is to give them some emotional reason why they should want to select us. And you may remember from school, there's this thing called halo effect, that if I know you and I like you and I'm scoring something, I'm going to give you just a couple more points. And I'm not trying to skew the process. It's just human nature. If I like you, your scores are going to be a little bit higher. And that's the piece that tends to be missing from a lot of the work we do, is give them that emotional reason to want to select us so that we can maximize the points. So capture planning is a process that helps you understand the client and what the client wants, and then put together your message, your win themes. I like the term value proposition. And I use value proposition because it reminds me that it's not about me. It's about what the client finds value in. So when you hear me say value proposition, you might call it other things. That's fine. This is just a term that I've elected, so it reminds me what I'm doing. So one of the questions is, how soon should you start? Well, I can tell you, according to PSMJ data, the average hit rate in our industry tends to be about 25 to 30%. And that's across all the AA communities that report to PSMJ. And I think that's probably a little optimistic, because I think there are companies, a lot of my clients don't do a very good job of being honest or realistic when they're reporting their wins and losses. So I even suspect that's high. So there's also some PSMJ data that relates win probability with when you get into the game. So a lot of those companies, particularly the ones with the 25% hit ratios, they see an RFP and they say, okay, we got to go chase this. Have no contact with the client. They didn't know it was coming, yet they decide to chase the project. If you do that, according to PSMJ data, and I check this data every few years, and believe me, it doesn't change, your probability of winning is right around 20%. Not a good gamble. So the middle section of this graph is what I call the proactive stage. So this is, at this point, the client knows they have a need. They're thinking about a project to solve the problem. They don't know what it is, but they're starting to talk to their consultants. They're talking among each other. They're looking at other available information. They're trying to figure out what this project's going to look like. If you can start talking to the client when they're still formulating the project in their mind, your hit rate probability goes way up. As you can see in this graph, it shows up to around 80%. So that line between creative and proactive, at that line, the client says, oh, I think we need to find some help with this. So if you can be engaging with the client before they've even decided that they're going to do a project, if you can take the need, identify the problem, take it to the client and say, we've noticed this, and we think we have a way you might be able to solve this, you get almost unbeatable. So the months to the RFP, that's sort of dependent on the size. You know, if it's a $50,000 project, the client's maybe not thinking about it more than a few weeks ahead. On a $10 million project, they've probably been thinking about it for years. It's probably been in their capital improvement program. So the bigger the project, the more strategic the project, the longer that lead time needs to be. So there was been some questions about go, no go decisions. I can tell you that for me, one of the hard stops is if we see an RFP and we have had no contact with the client, it's an automatic no-go. And in my mind, there are very few, if any, exceptions to that. It's a hard discipline to do, but in this business, the difference between the winners and losers is not who has the coolest toys. It's not who has the strongest resume. It really comes down to the rigor and discipline with which you apply these capture planning tools. So this is a simple roadmap on how you go about winning jobs. And the capture plan is a way that you step through this process and you document it, you work those decisions with your team. So it starts with identifying the project, just learning about the project. What is it? Why are they doing it? That's the drivers. You know, your clients aren't made of money. So if they're spending money on a particular project, there's some driver behind that. And sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it was in the CIP or in their capital plan, and it just made it to the top of the list. But very often there's some other reason why they're prioritizing this project. Where is the money coming from? What are the client's goals? What are they trying to achieve? The CFS, that's critical success factors. And that's shorthand for in the client's mind, what absolutely has to happen for them to be satisfied with the outcome. So now you've got a picture of what the project is. The second step is to understand how this particular client makes decisions. Now, if you're dealing with a federal agency, it's very structured. So you've got lots of rules, lots of steps, and SF 330, it's ugly. Lots of other agencies have their own processes. They can be more or less complex. You know, sometimes it's just one step. It's an SOQ. Sometimes it's an SOQ, then a technical proposal. Sometimes there's interviews, a best and final. Their processes vary. If it's a private client, sometimes it's one person, you know, makes a decision, calls you up and says, you want to do this work for us. So it's important that you understand what the decision process is for this particular client and this particular project. You need to know what their schedule is. When are they going to put out this RFP? And they slide. The schedules are never accurate, but knowing about when it is gives you a good start. The rules of the game, every client is a little different, but I found that a majority of the clients that I'm familiar with have rules like once they publish the RFP, they won't talk to you anymore. There's a really good reason to be ahead of the curve. Some of them require that you meet some diversity and equity requirements. If the funding, depending on the funding, there could be other rules like Buy America. There's all sorts of particular rules, and you can lose projects if you don't identify those rules early. And the last thing that I put into this is the pursuit team. I believe that we should treat pursuits just like a major project. And that means there's a dedicated team that says, we're going to win this project. And there are certain roles that you have to have as part of that team. So who are the people that are going to execute this pursuit and win it? So once you've done that, the next step is you have to understand who's going to make the decision. There are some really great tools out there with various names. Client analysis, those of you old timers that remember Doug Knudsen, he had a tool he called client analysis, which is basically a slightly dumbed down version of something that was done by Miller and Hyman in the mid 70s. They call it something different, buyer analysis, I think. Great tools, but they're all based on this theory that, it's not theory, it's a fact, that when groups make decisions, there are certain roles that take place within that group. And if you can figure out who's taking on each of those roles, then you can come to some decision about who has the most power, who has the most influence, who matters, who doesn't matter. So I wish I could go through client analysis, but that's a lot longer conversation. But that's something that you could look into, and I can give you some resources for other versions of client analysis that you could dig into. In addition to the client side roles, there are also roles with respect to us. Do they like us? Do they not like us? Are there ways within which they can help us? Will they be coaches for us? Will they be sponsors to help carry the ball? Do they not like us? Would they rather see somebody else win? So we have to understand all the members of that decision-making body and understand how they operate. Now, once we've got that down, then comes the key point, which we have to know what they really want. And there's only one way, really, and that's to ask them. There are other ways. Some clients are difficult to get to. Federal clients are notorious for being difficult to get to. But basically, you have to understand what their agendas are, what they're trying to achieve, what's motivating their decisions. And then based on the power structure within that decision-making body, you can start to build an approach, a message around those motivators. So once you think you understand what they're going to base their decision on, then the next step is to develop your value proposition. And there's a tool that I'm going to dig into a little bit more detail today. I call it a PSOE, stands for Problem, Solution, Outcome, and Evidence. Some of my employers, clients, colleagues over the years have different terms. There's a group that calls it IFBP, which actually might be the original definition of this tool, dating back to like 1960. And that stands for Issue, Feature, Benefit, Proof. Then there's other subsets of that. But the idea of this tool is it helps us take what we hear from the client in terms of what's going to drive their decision and refocus it around what benefits they're looking for. So from that PSOE, and we'll walk through one of those today, that's the tool that if you take nothing else away from this today, that one's worthwhile. So we'll walk you through a quick example of a PSOE. Now from that PSOE, that's where you develop your strategy. So I've gone into capture plan meetings where the very first, everybody sits down, introduces themselves, and somebody says, well, so who's our competition? Who's our project manager? What's our message? Those are great questions, but they're not great questions until you've really made sure you understand what the client wants. Then once you've got that value proposition and you go test it with the client, now you're ready to talk about the strategy. You analyze the competition, you talk about the team, you talk about your strategy, your approach, all of those kinds of things. Once you've got that figured out, now you got to start to communicate it. Now, if you've started when the RFP came out, you have one communication tool, and that's your proposal. If you've started 6 months early, you have all sorts of means of communicating with your client at your disposal. So there's lots of things you can do to start to send your message. We can talk about those if you start early enough. So that is the overall capture planning process. I do have some standard things that I'd be willing to share. I have a generic agenda that I use for capture plan meetings that I would be willing to share. You know, you have to customize it to each particular customer and pursuit, but it's kind of the steps that I go through when I'm leading a capture plan process. And I'd be glad to share that. So that's the overall capture planning process. I want to talk a little bit about how human beings make decisions. So we are one of the only or few species that has a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's the neo-mammalian brain. It's the part of our brain that developed last as we were going through our evolution. And it's the part of the brain that makes smart decisions. It controls things like delayed gratification, executive function, comparisons, analysis. All those are managed by the prefrontal cortex. And we would like to think that that's how we make our decisions. It's not true. So as human beings, what we tend to do is there's this other part of the brain that's not very smart, but it kept us viable as a species for eons. And it's that small purple piece in the back of the brain called the limbic systems. And the limbic part of the brain, also people call it the reptilian brain or the lizard brain. Like I say, it's not very smart, but it responds to fear, to desires. It's the part of the brain that controls appetites, sex drive, fear. It's the fight or flight part of the brain. And as human beings, what we really tend to do is we make our decisions with this emotional part of the brain, and then we go back and kind of double check with the prefrontal cortex and see if it makes sense or not, if we even get to that step. So I've got an old friend and a client who has a saying all the time. He says, when all things are equal, clients hire their friends, and when they're not equal, they still hire their friends. So speaking of emotional response, when this slide first came up, did anybody's stomach kind of turn over? I use this slide a lot. It's a real attention getter, and it relates to what we're talking about. And it's a true story. I still have a friend. He was a dear friend as I was first getting into this business back in the 1980s. And he's a dentist. He's a really good one. His name was Dr. Knuth, and Dr. Knuth was my dentist. And one day after tennis, Dr. Knuth, my buddy Randy, said, I got a question for you. I've been reading this. Keep in mind, this is old. This is 1980. Dr. Knuth said, there is this new drill on the market. It's a laser drill, and nobody has one. They're really expensive, but there's not a single one in Tucson, which is where we live. I was thinking about if I invested in this drill, that would help my business. What do you think? And I scratched my head and I said, Randy, nobody cares about your drill. Have you ever had a client, a patient say to you, Dr. Knuth, what kind of drill do you use? No. What do they ask? How much is it going to hurt? And how much is it going to cost? So if you can say, I've got this laser drill that makes your dentistry absolutely pain-free, yes, people will line up around the block to get in to see you. Otherwise, not so much. Now, what does that mean to you? Well, ask yourself in the last proposal or long list of proposals, what were we presenting? And I can tell you that most of the proposals that I see out there are selling laser drills. They're not selling pain-free dentistry. So what this reminds me of is that when we're talking to our clients, they don't care about us. They don't care about our tools. They don't care about our resumes. That's all table stakes. We have to have that to get in the game. What they care about is the benefits they're going to derive from the work that we do and the solutions that we offer. So I call all of those things motivators. Motivators, just as a general term, in the way I'm using it, is anything that creates a willingness to change or to act. That's going to drive the client's decision. So it could be a problem, something they're worried about, a concern. It could be a desire, some long-term goal they've had. It could be personal pain or gain agendas. So these are the things that are going to drive the client to make a decision one way or another. So kind of subsets of those motivators, there are features. And a feature is something that's about us. It's what we have to offer. It's our great resume. It's the clients who love us. It's our testimonials, our models, our tools. It's all the stuff that we have that are about us. And that's where we tend to focus. I think our job leading these marketing teams is to change that focus to not be about features, but be about benefits. Now, a differentiator is a good thing to have. Differentiators are features that our competitors can't match. So it sets us apart from those competitors, and that's really good. but it's still not what the clients are looking for. The clients are looking for what's in it for me. That's what they're looking for. It's what influences and what buys them. Going back to the Dale Carnegie comment, find out what they want and show them how to get it. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about the psoe process. And the goal of the problem solution outcome evidence, or IFBP process, is to take all of these issues, these motivators, and to rethink them and put them in terms of the outcomes or the benefits that the client's actually looking for. Oops. So, whoops, sorry. Okay. So the story about this little exercise, it was originally based on a real project. It was a water treatment plant in a mid-sized city. And the team went out to talk to the clients and find out what they were concerned about. What are the motivators? And they came back with a pretty long list. And we went through a process of prioritizing those based on who we heard them from, how much power or influence each of those people, the decision makers, had, how many times we heard them, how much energy went behind it. So we looked at all of the long list and we narrowed it down to 3 that we seemed to hear over and over again. And the people on the panel with the most power we're most concerned about. And in this case, we narrowed it down to 3. The first one is the public is concerned about lack of service. They're also concerned about disruptions during construction. The second one is we're looking for the lowest life cycle cost. And the third one is we want a project manager that'll give us good service, and we want a dedicated team located in our office. So we've got this list of motivators. Now we ask ourselves, what are these? Are these issues or concerns? Are they features, something we have to offer? Or are they the benefit that the client wants? So this first one, the public is concerned about lack of service. So where does that fit? Well, that's an issue or a problem. So it goes into, it'll go into that column. The next one, the client wants lowest life cycle cost. That's something the client wants. It's an outcome they're looking for. That's a benefit. The third one is they want a project manager that's known for service and a dedicated co-located team. Now they're defining the features that they're looking for. So this one would be a feature or a solution. So now we've got our 3 motivators. We understand what they are. Now let's see how we use the psoe. So psoe, or an IFBP, is very simply a 4-column matrix, where column 1 is where we put the problem, the issue, the concern that the client has. In column 2, we put our solutions or our features. This is what we bring to the client. The third column is the outcome or the benefit. Remember, this is what the client really wants, and the evidence or proof. This is where we've done it before. How can we demonstrate it? So now we take each of those motivators and we figure out where they go, and we fill out the form. So the first one, the public is concerned about lack of services. That's an issue or a problem. So when a client tells me about an issue or a problem, my first question is, so what do you want to see? What's the outcome you're looking for? Well, we don't want any neighborhood complaints. Now, what are they worried about? Well, they're worried about not having water. They're worried about noise and dust during construction. We want to get rid of these neighborhood complaints. Okay, got that. So now the third place we go is, what can we do to solve that problem? Well, the team did some brainstorming and said, well, we can do fast track construction. We can work double shifts. So it's a lot faster, less noise, less disruptions. And that'll be our solution or our feature. And the proof is, where have we done it before? Do we have some good examples? Do we have some testimonials? Do we have letters from neighbors that liked what we did? So now we go to the next one. In this case, the client has said they want the lowest life cycle cost. So when a client tells me the outcome they're looking for, I want to know why. So what I would say is, why is the lowest life cycle cost so important to you on this project? And the answer is simple. Well, it turns out we've got a pot of money to build it. What we always run into problems is we don't have a lot of money to operate and maintain it year after year. That comes out of a different fund. It comes out of the general fund, and that's much more limited. So we're willing to pay a little bit more to get it, but we definitely want the lowest life cycle cost. Cool. So we'll provide that. So now we go to our feature column. How can we give it to them? Well, we'll put on more durable equipment. It's going to cost them a little more, but it'll lower their power uptake. It'll last longer. It'll be easier for them to own and maintain. What's our proof? Well, one place you might get the proof is industry data that says, the power usage of the equipment, and those types of things. So the last one, this is where the client says, we want a project manager that's known for dedicated co-located service. So when a client tells me the feature they're looking for, I ask the why question again. Why is that so important to you? Well, in the last project, the contractor, the consultant that we hired was not responsive. We got a lot of bad press. The city manager looked terrible. He was just beaten up in the press, and he said that better never happen again. So to make sure it doesn't happen, we want a responsive, or what we're looking for is responsive service and no surprises. So they've said, in this case, they've said what the feature is. So now we've got our psoe all filled out. So now what do we do with this? How do we turn this into a message or a value proposition? Well, we take the middle two columns. So we take a feature and a solution. We mash them together. We do a little wordsmithing. And so we say, well, if we give you fast track construction with double shifts, you'll get the earliest completion. We can finish 3 months early. The neighbors are going to be thrilled. We're going to give you more durable, we're going to provide you more durable equipment. It's going to cost you a little more, but it's going to give you that lowest life cycle cost. And we're going to give you that project manager that's known for service and a dedicated team. What you get is responsive, no surprises service. Well, that's a mouthful. So what we'd like to do is get this down to some nice, terse statements that are memorable, they're sticky, and convincing. So we did a little mashing up, and this is what we came up with. Fast track construction saves 3 months and minimizes neighborhood impacts. Number 2, proprietary high durability equipment lowers your life cycle cost. And 3rd, dedicated local team led by a proven responsive PM delivers no surprises, no exclusive service. So your last task is to, if you look at these benefits and you said, okay, if we put these all together, is there one overarching theme that captures them all? So selecting our team will deliver the greatest community acceptance for the city because we offer you 3 major benefits, and they're these. So that's our value proposition. That's our message. Now, what do we do with this? Well, I can tell you, it's as we start to write the proposal. Well, the first thing we have to do is go test with the client to make sure we got it right. But assuming that it's right, now we start to outline our proposal. We think, how can we prove this? In every section, we have to prove one or more of these. So I tell you, the first time the client's going to see it from us in the proposal, it's going to be in the cover letter. So I would suggest that if you start your cover letters with "we're pleased to submit," throw it away. The client doesn't care whether you're pleased or not. The client cares about their project. So when I write a cover letter, the first paragraph is always, what about their project? So the city has a problem. You need a new water treatment plant. You've got limited funds, and you've got community that's really, really active and concerned about how this project goes. We're going to take care of that. So here's why you should select our team in our value proposition. So they're going to see it, the first page of the cover letter. We're going to repeat this over and over throughout the proposal. If we do an SOQ, it's going to be there. If we do an interview, the last slide of the interview will be the same message. So they're going to see the same message over and over again, and that's what a good value proposition is for. So will it win? Well, now you got to go back and talk to the client. And if you've got relationships with this client, you can go back and say, we've been talking to you about this project for the last 3 months, and this is what we think we've heard. What did we miss? And so you'll hear something, guy say, yeah, we love it. Or, well, there are a couple of things that we're also concerned about. And I had one client once that said, well, I don't really care about that issue very much. I'd rather you talked about this. In that case, the client just gave you your value proposition. Now you're ready to start putting that capture plan into words and into action, and you're ready to go to work. So that's the 30-minute version of capture planning. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
That was awesome, Steve. I commented that was the best PSOE, easiest. You made it look so simple.
Well, yeah, that's the cheating part. It's never that simple. For instance, mine only had three three features or three themes.
Motivators, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, three motivators, and they all lined up nicely, a nice one-to-one correspondence. When you actually do this, you'll probably find, you know, two or three issues that all have one solution, or one solution that has two or three benefits. So it's not as, you're not going to be able to do it in 15 minutes like I just did. Also, people ask, well, how many themes should we have? There is some pretty compelling evidence out there that says there's something magical about things that come in threes. There's one consultant that I know and respect a lot who says it has to be three, no more, no less. I find a lot of times that's a little limiting, but there is an upper limit. Clients have, you know, they've only got so much they can take in out of your proposal. So I try to limit it at 5 in general. So I say it's either 3 or it's 5. There's also something good about odd numbers for some reason. So if I have my druthers, we can get to 3, we will. Otherwise, we'll put that a maximum of 5, and that's going to be our message. So I'll stop there and open up to questions.
Anybody have a question for Steve? I didn't see any in the chat, but was there any ones? I know you talked about some of them that we got ahead of time. Steve, any other ones that you wanted to talk about on getting those executives involved?
Yeah, I did notice that in the questions we got in advance, there was a theme, and it's a really good one. Unfortunately, this is something else that we could spend days, weeks, years talking about. And that is, how can we, as the marketing professionals, how can we convince the firm management, the technical leads, how can we convince them that this stuff has value? And that, you're not alone. That's endemic in our business. And it tends to be, you see it a lot with the smaller firms, but it's not just small firms. Big firms can have the exact same issue. And I think where it comes from is the way a lot of our firms got started. You know, there was somebody who put out a shingle, went out on their own. And if they weren't pretty good at marketing, then they failed. So if they stayed in business, it was because they were pretty good at marketing. And so then they bring on a couple of partners that are also pretty good at marketing, and the rainmaker model kind of takes over. And again, you know, they built such strong relationships that the whole science of doing proposals and persuasion doesn't seem that important to them. And it still works up to a point, and then the firm hits a size where the rainmakers can't feed everybody anymore, and then it starts to fall apart. The problem is the people that we're working for and with, you know, that's where they live. So how do we convince them that doing proposals is not just an add-on to the administrative functions, that this is a profession, and that just because you're a good project manager does not mean you know how to write good proposals. It doesn't mean you understand the science of winning work. So how do we convince them of that? Well, there's not an easy answer to that, but I have some things for you to think about. So there's some pieces I've done, some consulting I've done for clients. It's all about influence without authority, or influence without power. And that's really what this is. You've got knowledge, but you don't have power. How can you influence the way your companies do business when you don't have the authority to just make it happen? And it's a pretty common problem. But you know, when you think about it, it's not very different from when we're trying to win work. We don't have power over our clients. So how do we influence those clients when we don't have power? Again, it goes back to what Dale Carnegie said. What is it that they want, and how can we help them get it? So if you think about treating your management, your company like a client, and figure out, for this decision, you know, what is the role of marketing as a profession inside our company? And you think of it like a pursuit. Who are the decision makers? Who has the ultimate decision-making authority? Who are the people that can influence that decision? Who's for it? Who's against it? And do this just like you would a client. And then go talk to those people. Go talk to, well, assuming you've got the ability, talk to the CEO, talk to the marketing directors, talk to the chief financial officer, and find out, what do you see as the weaknesses in our ability to win work? Where could we do better? What are we looking for? Take those answers, go back and do a psoe, and see if you can put together a message. And then about how can you influence them? What is the message that will get them what they want? And then you start a program of education. You can do things like invite the leadership team members to go to some SMPS meetings where there might be some good training on marketing. AEC does all sorts of training around marketing. So you can look for ways to help educate them. You can provide them with some literature. There's a book that covers a lot of stuff that's a pretty easy read called Hope is Not a Strategy by a guy named Dick Page, that you might be able to provide them with. So we're looking for ways that we can start a gentle education process of the leaders in our firm and see if we can convince them to maybe change the way they think about marketing. So that's one. I'll say one more thing and then I'm going to shut up before we run out of time. There's a tool that I use. A lot of times I'm brought in by clients with just that in mind. The company decides we're not very good at winning work. We win the small jobs, we can't win the big ones. Our competitors are kicking our butts. And they bring me in to say, how can we do it differently? And so one of the things I do, I figure that the same thing that I just mentioned to you, that who I have to convince is the executive leadership team. I got to convince the president and the CEO or it's not going anyplace. So there's an exercise that I do where I just do the math for them. And I do it on a whiteboard. And I start by saying, so how much, what's your top line goal? How much money do you need to bring in a year in order to be a viable company? So I'll just make up some numbers, 20 million bucks. Okay, how much of that are you getting from add-on or sole source work? Well, pretty good. We get a lot of free work, so probably half of it. Okay, so you need $10 million. What's the average size of a project that you win? Go look at all your projects. What's the average size? Well, it's probably $100,000. Okay, so you need to win 100 of those to give you $10 million, right? Okay, now what's your hit ratio? And what is it really? Not what do you wish it was, but what is it really? Well, okay, it's 25%. So you have to write 400 proposals to win 100 jobs to give you the $10 million it takes to pay the bills. That's a lot of proposals. So instead of trying to write better proposals, why don't you try to write fewer proposals? What if you could take your hit ratio and increase it from 25% to 50%. And with doing some of the things that we're talking about, the things that Angie teaches, 50% hit ratio is not that hard to achieve. And the companies that are really rigorous and disciplined about it, they'll hit 75%. So now do the math. Ask yourself those same questions again and say, how much is it going to cost? What I left out of that is, how much does it cost to win a job? So lots of companies don't really know what a proposal costs. And so at a couple of my clients, they have counted every penny, even the parts that didn't make it onto a timesheet. And I can tell you that you can't write a decent SOQ for less than $5,000. And it's probably a lot more than that. That's the bare minimum. A technical proposal, $10,000, $20,000. An interview could take you $50,000 depending on the size of the job. So, you might do a cheap one for $10,000. So you just take some of those averages, you apply it to how many of those jobs you have to submit, and 400 jobs times that cost, that's a huge, scary number. So then when you walk them through the other side, now what if we could win 75%? Now it starts to, you see the light bulbs start to go on. So that's one exercise that you could do if you have that data at your disposal. That's probably a pretty good place for me to stop, Angie.
Yeah, one last question that Lindsay got that's a good one on is, what if the requirements and scoring criteria don't align with our clients' known concerns and motivators?
Ooh. Wow, that is really good because it happens all the time. We see RFPs that are written by a purchasing person and they don't know what they need. So you have to do two different things. You have to develop your value proposition and you have to stress it. But now you also have to make sure you answer the mail. You've got to get all the points for the selection criteria that they give you. And I don't worry too much about whether they match up. So going back to that cover letter, for example, if that's the case, what I'll do is I'll put the value proposition into that cover letter. And then below that, I'll say, looking at your proposal, we see that some of the things that are important to you are, and you list them out. And so you put something in that cover letter that also tells them that you're going to answer the mail and you're going to give them good information on all of those things. And then as you walk through, you've got to do, you got to put those in twice. So you really have to answer the mail in both directions. You've got to hit the stuff for making it possible for them to give you the points, and you've got to go after the emotional support as well.
Wow, that's a lot more work.
Yeah, isn't it?
One last question that might be easy. What's a legit win ratio, Steve? Either on engineering or construction.
Okay. On the engineering side, I would say if you're not winning 50%, you could be doing a lot better. So, to get from 25% to 50% is relatively easy. It's going to require some additional discipline, but it may not require transformational change in the organization. To get to 75%, that's going to take some real transformative type stuff, because you are going to have to do this all the time. The things that we're talking about have to be part of the culture, and every member of the firm has to buy in. I've got a couple of clients that really did go for that transformational change, and the results are, well, they're easy. They went from about 25% to over 75%, and they did it in a year. So it can be done, but it is a lot of work. And I will tell you that you will spend more money in each of the proposals, and you're also going to spend more money on that upfront positioning. But even though positioning costs money, it costs a lot less than writing losing proposals.
Yes, it does. All right. Well, thank you all.